Join us for an action-packed episode of Locked On Fantasy Baseball, where we review the 2023 season for the Philadelphia Phillies.
You are Locked On Fantasy Baseball, your daily fantasy baseball podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, fantasy baseball fanatics, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Sports Network, your team every day. As always, we're your number one source of fantasy baseball knowledge, and thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Dominic Martino. You can find me on Twitter at DomMartinoFB. Here, as always, with my brother, my co-host, my partner in crime, Matthew Ane, and you can find him on Twitter at Matthew_Ane. If you're listening on a platform like Apple or Spotify that allows 5-star ratings and reviews, we would truly appreciate it if you do that for us. And guess what? If you do, you have a little special opportunity here. Just take a screenshot of that rating and review, email it to us at fantasymds@gmail.com, or send it to us on Twitter or Instagram if that's easier for you. And you have the little opportunity to get a spot in our listener league for next season. We'll be announcing that, in a couple of months as we get closer to fantasy baseball season again. And lastly, if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't already, hit that little bell below. It subscribes to the channel, also gives you a notification every time we drop a new episode. And before we get into the Philadelphia Phillies, I need to talk to you about one of today's sponsors, FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150. If your team wins, visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started today. And Matt, we have your Philadelphia Phillies today. So why don't you take the lead, my brother, and talk about this season a little bit. Who do we got up first?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with the season overall. I just wish they would rock and roll a little bit earlier in the season. That's the problem. They're like a second half team. And I mean, in part to it too, Bryce Harper finally being able to get his bat going at the end really did it for him. But I mean, ultimately, the Phillies had a great season. They have at least another World Series appearance for them. So we shall see. But Bryce Harper, let's talk about him since he's pretty much the leader of this team, the great player of this season. Fantastic season so far. So I'm going to read you his year number, and then I'm going to talk about what were the real highlights for me. So for the 2023 season, not including the playoffs, he had 457 at bats. He had 84 runs. He had 21 home runs, 72 ribs, 11 stolen bases, and had a batting average of 293. So ultimately, he had a great season. The stats the overall stats don't really show you the, how impactful he was for fantasy down the stretch. So obviously he started playing in May, missed most of the beginning of the first couple months, and then took a little bit to get going. Didn't even play first base until, July after the All-Star break. Didn't even start getting going until pretty much August. It started seeing a little bit more at the end of July, and then boom, August kind of exploded because in that time he had 97 at bats. He had 23 runs. He had 9 doubles, a triple, 10 bombs, 24 ribs, and he was batting .361. September, he also went off, and he had 6 home runs in that time, but the batting average was a little down, but he had a little slump. But, I mean, you look at this, right? He had like 80% of his home runs were in these 2 months, which is scary. Now, here's a crazier part. Bryce Harper got better once the playoffs hit. And this is where I feel like, okay, we pretty much just saw his spring training, and this is the second half of his season because the playoff numbers are bananas. 181 at bats. He had 38 runs, 11 doubles, a triple, 16 bombs, 31 ribs, 30 walks to 40 to 48 strikeouts, and he had a 276 batting average. Like, Harper was phenomenal in the playoffs. And this is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 games. He nearly had a home run in every single game that he appeared in. And I know he had a couple double dongers, but I mean, Bryce Harper just absolutely shattered the baseball. And, you know, I feel he's going to be probably one of the most forgotten players of the playoffs in general, because everybody's going to be looking at all these other names and be like, I don't know what to do. I can't pick him over certain guys. But quite honestly, I think he's going to find his way, for me at least, in the first round, late first round, because there's certain guys I'm going to debate. But like, okay, it's like, okay, do I pick Aaron Judge or Bryce Harper? Like, Aaron Judge just hasn't been able to go a full season for me, but he's phenomenal when healthy. Bryce Harper, I think, is just going to have a full season and contribute all throughout the year. There's going to be other names, Jose Ramirez or Bryce Harper. Like, there is just names that we are just going to debate and see who I'm going to pick and who do you feel more comfortable leaving the first round with. So Bryce Harper is going to be an absolute stud next year.
Yeah, and then I'm not even sure that, Matt, if you mentioned that, he was coming off Tommy John. He the quickest return in MLB history from Tommy John, right, goes to Bryce Harper. Just a freak of nature. He is going to be 31 next year, but I still, somewhat of the prime of his career. Harper's upside is 35 plus bombs, 100 plus runs, 100 plus RBIs, 15 steals, and a 300 batting average. That puts him as a first round type talent. As Matt mentioned, I have Bryce Harper. He's strictly first base eligible now. I have him as my number 3 first baseman. And honestly, just beast. Don't feel, mad if you get him as your first player, and you should feel thrilled if he is the second player on your fantasy baseball team for next season. Let's move on to, Trea Turner, the big acquisition of the offseason for those Phillies. And he did come through, another guy that took him quite a bit to get going, but still finished the years with very strong numbers. I think second year Philly's going to be a monstrous season for Trea Turner. But, as a 30-year-old in 2023, Trea Turner had 155 games, 639 at-bats, 102 runs, 35 doubles, 5 triples, 26 homers, 76 RBIs, 30 steals with a 266 batting average. As Matt and I always say, one of, the things we always like to listen to is, first year new team is always tough. These guys are human beings. They got to move their family, house, school for the kids. Everything goes on, and that takes, a toll on you as a human being. Next year doesn't have to worry about any of that. I think Turner's upside is, 25 homers with, 40 plus steals, a close to 300 batting average, 100 runs, and, 85 RBIs would be nice as well. I think Trea Turner, is where do I have him when it comes to shortstop? I have Turner as my number 2 shortstop next season, just behind Bobby Witt. And he's coming off the board as the 9th overall player for next season so far, according to ADP for next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Dom, great take on him. I look at Turner in one way, bounce back player of the ages next year. I think, honestly, you're going to look at him and be like, wow, we got a deal on him this year, because I feel like going into 2025, Trea Turner is going to be back at the top of those, draft ADP, because he's just going to return to glory. I think it was all about, like you said, the new year, new team move. And we're going to see a resurgence in Trea Turner. But I don't really need to say much more, because you did a fantastic job. So before we move on, we talk about a guy that had a horrendous season, in my opinion, a guy that I called the bounce back, and a guy that just pretty much did exactly what you expected him to do. But before that, we got one sponsor. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you're thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in the action than now. The app is super easy to use. There's wide range of betting options, including point spread, player props, over and under, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season right. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. But all right. Let's move on. Let's talk about the guy I was teasing, and probably one of the worst seasons I've seen in a while from this dude, JT Realmuto. Honestly, man, I am so disappointed in him, because I had him as like my number 1, number 2 catcher, And he was super disappointing this year. You look at his numbers and you're like, dude, what happened, man? I know he's a slow starter too. He's usually a second half player, but this year it just really wasn't there for me. All right. He had 489 at bats, 70 runs. He had 28 doubles, 5 triples, 20 home runs, 63 ribs, 16 stolen bases, and he batted 252. And you're like, Matt, those numbers aren't much different from last year, right? He only had 5 less runs. He had 2 more doubles. He had the exact amount of triples, 2 less home runs, but the ribbies were 21 less. The batting average was down. And on top of that, if you really look and you break it down, the first half was so putrid. It was just so ugly. It was unbearable to own the dude at some points. You couldn't even start him. And then it really didn't get better till like August. Like that's not even like a second half. That's like the last month and a half, bro. Like JT Realmuto just didn't do it for me. And then you look at what he did in the playoffs and you're like, okay, like there is a little bit of bright spot, but it's almost the same thing. So he had 114 at bats. He had 18 runs. He had 5 doubles, which was fantastic. Came up clutch big in the games and had 6 home runs. Like I like all those numbers with the 18 ribs. But walked 7 times to 37 strikeouts and he batted 237. You know, I just really wasn't happy with his performance overall. And I look at JT Realmuto and it's not like he's not like going to be one of the better pitchers this year. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not completely falling off, but he's not going to be like my 1, 2, 3 catcher anymore. He's my number 5. I don't feel comfortable with him being my number 1 catcher this year. Dom looks at me like I'm a crazy person.
Oh no, you're not far off.
Yeah. I look at JT and I just like, okay, catcher has gotten a little bit deeper. And also too, maybe we're seeing a downward turn for JT. Maybe he's turning a corner of no return where, hey, they might have to move him on from being catcher, but he's from being an elite bat essentially, and he's just going to be an elite catcher where he is just there to play defense, and that's what he's really good at. He's just a good baseball player and not a fantastic fantasy asset. We shall see. But JT Realmuto is just not my cup of tea this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate JT. I think one of my biggest things is something that Matt was, alluding at is that catching's kind of deep again. We're getting to that, day and age where you're talking about, the 5th catcher is going at pick 137 off the board, and you can get Wilson Contreras at pick 159, Logan O'Hoppe at 178. JT Realmuto's coming off the board at pick 67. I'm not mad at these numbers from last year. Matt mentioned the RBIs and batting average took a nice little hit, but he was still productive. That is JT Realmuto. I'm not taking him as the number 2 catcher off the board, which is where he's going. I have him ranked number 4 going into next season, so I still believe one of the biggest appeal about JT was always that he could steal bases, but in today's day and age with the bigger bases and the pickoff rules, 16 steals aren't that advertising. To me, with the declining batting average, that I'm going to go and take him as number 2 overall catcher. That's not something I'm going to do. That's something I don't think you should do. But, the upside is, what we saw, a season ago, 2022 with, 276 batting average, 2020, 75 runs and 84 RBIs. Yeah, it's going to get it done at catcher for you for sure. But I don't know if we're banking on that anymore. I don't know if at age 33, JT's, taking a little bit of that age, starting the show. But, we've taken a lot of time on only a couple names here. Let's try and bang through the rest here. Let's talk about, one of Matt's boys, Nick Castellanos. Matt kind of called that little comeback year. I have to give shout out to my brother for that, where I was a little bit, more weary than he was. But you know what, Castellanos, a little first half heavy, but, we'll take these numbers all day long. 157 games this year for Castellanos, 626 at bats, 79 runs, 37 doubles, 2 triples, 29 homers, 106 RBIs, 11 steals, 272 batting average. I think that's kind of the baseline here with Castellanos. I think we're going to see very, very similar numbers next season. Guy was hitting a lot of homers in the playoffs. I have Castellanos as my outfielder number 18. Honestly, could see even being a couple higher than that. He's going to be a stellar number 2 option as an outfielder next season.
Oh yeah, I mean, the only thing that could probably drive down Nick Castellanos is if he gets moved. There's rumors of him being traded to kind of make room and for unfortunately bringing back Reese Hoskins. So Nick Castellanos. We'll see where he is. If he's still on the Philadelphia Phillies, he's 100% going to be much higher in my rankings. But right now, it's unclear. So he'd be TBD on him. But let's move on. Let's talk about Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber, did his good old thing. He really hit for absolutely putrid batting average at a 197. But had 47 home runs, 104 ribs, 108 runs, 19 doubles, a triple. And the funniest stat for me is he had 126 walks to 215 strikeouts. Now, I watched a lot of Schwarber. He's really good at plate discipline. The problem is he also hits the ball so often that he just gets a whole bunch of flyouts because almost every single ball can nearly go over the fence, and that's literally what happens. So Kyle Schwarber, is like the exact opposite of new age batting average. He just makes so much contact that from pulling the ball that if he were to just change his launch angle even just a smidge and just go for more, obviously contact, but placing the ball in less arc and less angle on it, right? He would be so much better in batting average and still be able to maintain those good power numbers and be a super elite player. So, like, Kyle Schwarber is a great player overall, and the batting average really isn't reflected. Funny enough, he is going to be valuable in points and roto just based off of the fact that he still only has a 50% walk to strikeout ratio. So that's actually pretty elite.
Yeah, I love Kyle Schwarber, and when you take Kyle Schwarber in fantasy, you just have to know what it is. You know that he's going to destroy your batting average. So by the time you get to Schwarber, you need to have already built a nice core of batting average. He's like a great pair with like a Luis Arraez and guys like that are just going to be very, very good in batting average and not give you too much else. You could supplement guys like that with a Kyle Schwarber that's going to give you 45 plus home run power with 100 and 100. And the craziest Schwarber stat is he didn't steal any bases this year. He was caught stealing twice this year. Last year he had 10 steals, so I don't know where all of that went. I mean, hopefully we can recoup a little bit of the the steals in the Schwarber's game next year. At least maybe get you 5. But he's coming off the board early ADP Schwarber at pick 86, outfielder number 20. I am pretty in sync with that. I have Schwarber as, outfielder number 19 in my rankings going into next year. Just a very, very good player. Just know that you're going to get killed in batting average and just supplement that as you go along. But before we move on and we talk about a couple of young bats and get into the starting pitching team, we do have a quick ad for you guys. All right, guys, thanks for hanging in there with us. Let's move on. We got a couple of young guns here. Let's talk about Bryson Stott.
A-okay, baby.
What happened there?
You don't know. No, see, everybody in Philly just sings this dude's song every time he comes up. It's A-okay.
Oh, okay, all right, there you go. See, I'm not at those Philly games with Matt, but shout out to Bryson Stott, right? Everyone I think kind of got fatigued because he had a really, really bad rookie showing. But this year, Bryson Stott kind of said, hey, this is why it was a pretty well-renowned prospect. 151 games for Stott, 585 at bats, 78 runs, 32 doubles, 2 triples, 15 homers, 62 RBIs, 31 steals, and a 280 batting average. Stott, there's upside. Kid's going to be 26 next year. Getting into that prime of his career. I've honestly had such a hard time ranking him because it's shortstop is such a deep position. Actually, he's only second base eligible. I'm sorry, I meant second base is getting deeper. I have Stott currently as my number 16 second baseman. I actually was able to move him up a little bit. I forgot. I was doing a little bit of a deep dive. This guy's like a Nico Horner with a little bit more power, honestly. So we could see Stott next year. Honestly, I think 30 plus steals. Honestly, I think he can get to 18 homers. The runs and RBIs really going to depend where he hits in this lineup. Early look looks like Stott is going to probably hit around 6th, which kind of limits him in that runs and RBIs. But I still think the runs could be, the upwards of 80. RBIs can be upwards of, 80, 85. I think he's going to be a steal when we're talking about draft day next year for, Bryce and Stott. I'm going to pull up this ADP here as I pass it off to my brother Matt to talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Stott is like they move him all around because the manager there just gets so analytical. It's really frustrating where he has to do the lefty righty garbage. But ultimately, Bryce and Stott just gets moved all around. So yeah, like the runs and the ribbies category, I think will be limited, like you said. But I think the runs opportunity is actually going to be there, and he's going to be driven in a lot. And stolen base is going to be phenomenal for him. And quite honestly, I think next year he kind of hits that 20 home run mark, if not 22. I like Bryson Stott a lot, not just being a fan of the team, but I actually am a fan of him. And funny enough, I have him at like the number 12 second baseman for me.
Yeah, man, ADP lines up with you a little bit more than myself because early ADP for Bryson Stott, number 9 second baseman, pick 112 off the board. So if you want Stott, honestly, looks like you're going to have to pay up for him next year.
Like you think about it though, bro, like you go, okay, Zach Geloff or Bryson Stott.
Honestly, probably Stott. I like the team better.
Right. Gleyber Torres or Stott.
Once again, I'm probably going Stott.
Okay. Andres Gimenez or Stott.
Definitely Stott. I don't even think that one's that close.
Right. So that's the next 1, 2, 3, 4 3 guys under him. And then you got like Brandon Lowe and Brendan Donovan.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Honestly, when I look at my second base, I have Stott at 16. I see him moving up, honestly. 7? Is 7 too high second base? I think the whole thing is that people just don't really, because this Phillies team is so loaded that people don't sit back and realize how good Bryson Stott was in his second year. I think the fantasy community has hopped onto it because I think these 17 drafts that we're seeing in NFPC, probably a lot of experts in these drafts. So, that kind of is why Bryson Stott is going to go that high next year. Just the upside is very, very high. But, Matt, I think we should start talking about some of these pitchers. Want to take the lead? Should I take the lead?
You know what? I kind of want to take the next guy, so you could have this guy.
So I'll pop off you with Zach Wheeler. I just think Zach Wheeler's super consistent. That's why, honestly, I have him super high as starting pitcher going into next year. I have Zach Wheeler as my number 8 starting pitcher off the board for next season. A 3.61 ERA, which I think is an inflated ERA for Wheeler because if you go back the last 3 years, he was under 3. 192 innings for Wheeler, 212 strikeouts, a 107 whip. And even if you look at Wheeler's FIP, it's just fielding independent pitching, it's an ERA indicator, is a 3.15 compared to that 3.61 ERA. So that's why I was telling you that ERA is very inflated for me. I think he'll get back to normal next year. Age 34, getting a little bit older. But we know who Zach Wheeler is. He's not really showing any signs of getting older or rust. Sometimes it does drop off quick, but I think we can rely on Zach Wheeler for at least one more strong year of a number 1 starting pitching calibers.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Wheeler's just been great. And, this season was a little bit off, but then towards the end of the season, he made a mechanic change. And that kind of like wrote the ship for him. And he kind of really was elite in the playoffs. I think Zach Wheeler's going to be fine. One thing about the Phillies is they have some good things and they bad things with the analytics and integrating technology into the organization where like they use a lot of AI. So like they use that to adjust, guys' stances, mechanics, both on the pitching side and the hitting side. So like Zach Wheeler was definitely a positive reaction to that technology. So I foresee him still having, at least 1 or 2 more years left in the tank for him. But let's move on to this next guy here. Let's talk about Aaron Nola. Honestly, like probably one of the most fuggliest seasons from him, but to be expected, even though my bold prediction this year was for him to break the cycle and have 2 years good back to back. But unfortunately, I was way off. So here's how I'm going to look at it. You're going to get Aaron Nola at a discount. Everybody who has burned that this year is going to pass on him like crazy. And this is a year to draft him. I don't care where he is next year. He's going to be fine. I actually think he's going to return to the Phillies because of how well he pitched in the playoffs. He was reliable except for the one game against the Diamondbacks, which of course was the giant choking moment. But ultimately, he was good. So Aaron Nola, I feel, will return to Philadelphia and continue to do his wonderful thing and probably go on a Cy Young run, not win, but probably go on a run and probably do great. If he goes to another team, the teams that are probably on this list are probably the Rangers, could possibly be the Dodgers, could possibly be, the Mariners or, any other team making a run for it. And he's going to be successful. He might be the one dude that kind of beats the rule of new team and kind of just goes off just based off of him as a player. And he's like a tinker machine. He's like the Trevor Bauer light without all the outside garbage.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much in sync here with Nola. I just think he's going to be good. I don't know if it is the every other year trend. The reason I think he's going to be good, I just think Nola's the kind of guy that gets unlucky for long, not long stretches. It's just like specific outings. He has these big blow up outings of like 3 home runs in 4 innings, and he gives up 6 earned. And that just happens a little bit too often in certain years, and I think next year, Nola, once again, like Matt said, no matter where he winds up, will be good. I remember my number 9 starting pitcher coming off the board, has the potential of like a 3.5 ERA with, 200 innings, 200 plus strikeouts. And even in a bad year like this year, Nola still had a 115 whip. In a good year, you're talking about a guy who could have a whip of like, like a 108. And, at age 31, still pretty much, right near that prime of his career. I think Aaron Nola is going to be strong for next year. He's coming off the board early ADP at pitcher 12, which I think is reasonable. You don't really want Nola as as your SP1, but I'm not mad at Nola at my SP1. It's kind of like a double-edged sword almost. Matt, I'm gonna switch things up here a tiny bit. I'm gonna grab not this next guy we have listed, but the guy under him. I'm gonna move him up one because I am a little bit excited to talk about Christopher Sanchez going into next season. I don't know if his spot in the rotation is solidified going into next year. But if Aaron Nola leaves, I think there is room for him to get that spot. And I really do like what Christopher Sanchez brings to the table. Very, very good. Kind of came out of nowhere, especially, my opinion for this season. I didn't have my radar on him. Strong through 18 starts, 3.44 ERA, age 26 for Christopher Sanchez, 99 innings, 96 strikeouts with a 104 whip. Yes, the FIP was a little bit high, but I do like the stuff from Sanchez. The fastball's got good movement, so does the breaking stuff. He doesn't throw super hard at 92, but he gets a lot of whiffs. He gets a lot of people to chase on it. I think if he has a spot in the rotation, I'm probably going to have him around like my starting pitcher 65 in that range. But I think there's a lot of upside here with Christopher Sanchez going into next season.
I mean, I like where you were going with it until you said pitcher 65. Like, honestly,
if he's guaranteed a spot.
I mean, that's where like we were talking about in yesterday's podcast about like between him and Brandon Pfaadt. I'll probably lean on the Pfaadt side and just like deal with the Pfaattiness.
Yeah, see, that's a close one. I'm not mad at you for that either. That's kind of more of a preference. I think if I was in a spot where I needed more strikeouts at that point in my draft, I'd go Pfaadt. If I wanted a little bit more consistency, a lower ERA, I would go Sanchez. But I definitely see your point.
Yeah. But anyway, let's move on. Great take on him overall, but
Thank you.
That's TBD. I think he might have the spot in the rotation, but for how long? Let's put it that way. And that's bearing no free agency signings either. But let's talk about Ranger Suarez. Ranger is an interesting one. He's going to have a rotation spot. There's no question on that one. In terms of fantasy relevance, honestly, I don't think there's much. He is really good at ERA. He's really good at a K per 9, but the problem is the K per 9 has really just been closer on this year than it was in the years prior. He's going to suppress the runs and have a nice ERA because he has a career, hiccups now, 3.41 ERA. But ultimately, I look at Ranger and I go, he's just like a really good streaky pitcher that I'll do against really good matchups, but I'm not going to roll out too often in a regular, league or draft in that aspect. He's kind of one guy that's going to be, um, you know, irrelevant for me. But Dom, take this next guy real quick.
Yeah, we're in lock and sync Ranger Suarez. Just a guy that I'm not really looking at going into next season. Let's talk about the closer. Let's talk about Jose Alvarado. Actually had a monster start to the season where he was looking like honestly the best closer in baseball for the first couple of months. He got hurt, but he did come back and finish the season strong. I have Alvarado next year. I did do my closers maybe I could probably move around a little bit more, but I'm looking at at least the top 12 for Alvarado next year if he has that spot locked in, which I think he will. But you know what, guys, we're going to call it there. That's all for today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Thank you for our everydays and new listeners for making Locked On Fantasy Baseball your first listen each and every day. But until next time, guys, see you.
Peace.